Welcome to Whispers of Asia, a channel where shadows breathe and silence speaks louder than words. Tonight, we take you to the mist-covered shores of Shikoku, Japan, where fishermen speak of a woman who walks out of the sea wearing a white funeral kimono, her long black hair slicked with salt water, her hands cold as the tide. She doesn't scream, she doesn't chase, she only asks one thing, softly, like a breeze through the reeds. Will you bring me home? And those who say yes are never seen alive again. Their boats drift back to shore, untouched, their faces frozen in terror, their mouths filled with live, writhing eels. The only trace she leaves behind is a single soaked kimono folded neatly at the bow. They call her Unagi Nyōbō, the eel wife, a drowned bride offered to the sea generations ago, her soul bound to the tides, forever searching for a husband willing to follow her beneath the waves. But this is no tale of vengeance, no spirit seeking justice. This is about devotion twisted by sorrow, about love turned to longing so deep it drags the living down. She does not lure you with beauty or passion. She lures you with your loneliness, the kind of ache that makes you say yes when you should run. So listen closely. If you ever hear someone calling from the fog, asking for your help, do not answer, do not look back, and whatever you do, do not say yes, because the sea has a memory, and she is still waiting.
The wind came in quiet tonight, whispering low across the sea, like it had secrets it didn't want to shout. From the edge of the dock, Kazuki lit a cigarette with shaking hands, not because of the cold, but because something about the tide felt wrong. He'd fished these waters since he was 15. Now at 37, his instincts were older than he was. And tonight, they were telling him not to go. But he needed the money, and the fish were better under a clouded moon. So he pushed off, alone into the mist, his small wooden boat creaking like it too wanted to stay ashore. By midnight, the fog had thickened into a wall. He couldn't see the lights of the village anymore, couldn't even see his own wake. Only the sound of water brushing against the boat kept him from feeling completely adrift. Then he saw her, a shape, pale, motionless, standing on the surface of the sea like it was solid ground. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, but she remained. Her white kimono rippled slightly, though there was no wind. Her hair, impossibly long, hung in wet ropes around her shoulders. And her eyes, they looked straight at him, not startled, not angry, just waiting. He froze, one hand on the oar. She didn't move, didn't speak. And then, so softly it barely broke the air, she asked, "Will you bring me home?" Kazuki didn't answer, not with words, but something inside him, some quiet ache he hadn't named in years, made him nod, just once. The sea made no sound. The woman smiled, and then she was gone, slipped beneath the water without a ripple. Kazuki stayed out on the water for 2 more hours, didn't fish, didn't row, just sat there, staring at the place where she'd stood. When he came back to shore, he didn't speak to anyone, walked straight past the others on the dock with salt still drying in his hair, went home, locked the door, didn't answer the phone, didn't eat, and the next morning, he was gone. His boat was found 3 days later, drifting silently in the cove. Inside, there was no sign of struggle, no blood, no broken boards, just a single white funeral kimono folded neatly at the bow. His body washed ashore 2 days after that. His mouth was open, filled with living eels that writhed and squirmed even as the medics zipped up the bag. His eyes were wide, terrified, like he'd seen something he couldn't ever unsee, something not meant for human sight. The elders of the village said nothing. The younger men murmured superstitions, crossed themselves in ways half remembered from grandmothers long gone. But no one said the name, not out loud, and certainly not near the water. One boy, a teenager with too many questions and not enough fear, asked his grandfather if it was the eel wife. The old man slapped him hard across the mouth and told him never to say that again, not here, not anywhere, and definitely not when the fog was thick. That night, the boy dreamed of a woman walking through the waves. Her hair glistened with salt, her eyes were soft, her voice sounded like it was calling him home. And when he woke up, the soles of his feet were wet. At dawn, someone nailed a fresh charm to the shrine facing the sea. The paper was soaked through within the hour. A week passed. Another boat returned without its captain. Another folded kimono. Another mouth full of eels. They tried to rationalize it. A serial killer. A strange disease. Some even said it was a curse passed down from the war. But the oldest woman in the village, blind and nearly deaf, muttered a single phrase again and again as she rocked in her chair by the window. She doesn't want revenge. She wants a husband. When asked what she meant, she only smiled and added, "The sea remembers what it was promised." And no one dared ask again. Outside, the mist never quite lifted, not fully. It hung around the shoreline like a curtain drawn between the living and something else, something older, something that wears the memory of a woman and waits, always waits, just beyond the last buoy, where the light doesn't reach, where the lonely go to drown. They found the boat just before dawn, rocking gently in the cove like it had never been touched by anything but wind and wave. The fishermen were the first to spot it, though none of them wanted to be the first to speak. In this village, silence was safer. Still, someone eventually called the authorities. When they arrived, the sun was rising, a pale sliver of gold behind the clouds. Officer Tetsuya stepped onto the dock with a cigarette between his lips and a weariness that hadn't left him since his transfer to this forgotten port town 3 years ago. He'd seen drunks fall overboard, smuggling accidents gone wrong, and 1 or 2 suicides left with notes tucked inside empty lunchboxes. But nothing prepared him for this. The boat was unmarked. No blood, no struggle. Not a single net had been cast. The motor was untouched, the oars still tied neatly at the side. It was as if the owner had never intended to fish, just float. And at the front of the boat, resting on the wooden seat as if left with purpose, was a folded white kimono, soaked clean through. Tetsuya reached for it with gloved hands. It was heavy with water. But there were no rips, no stains, no signs it had ever been worn in violence. Yet something about it made him recoil. The weight felt wrong, like it held more than just fabric and sea, like it had memory. The lab would later confirm the cloth was saturated with seawater from the deepest currents, far below where small boats ever sailed. No DNA, no fingerprints, no traceable fibers, just salt. And something else, something faintly organic that couldn't be identified. Tetsuya didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it again, how carefully it had been folded, how deliberately placed, like a farewell or an offering. Word spread fast in the village. No one said it out loud, of course, but the whispers carried farther than the wind.
Children were kept indoors. Men tied fresh charms to their boats, muttering apologies to no one in particular. The old priest returned from retirement and reopened the shrine by the cliffs, though he refused to explain why. One woman claimed she saw something in the water that morning, a shape just below the surface, white and drifting. When asked to describe it, she only cried. The teenage boy who had dared to speak her name stopped eating. He stared out his window each night, mumbling answers to questions no one else could hear. His grandmother burned every photo in the house that showed the sea. When Tetsuya visited him, he found the boy's hands covered in small bite marks. "From what?" he asked gently. The boy didn't look at him, just whispered, "They don't like it when you speak." That same night, a group of young men tried to sink the boat. They rowed it out past the rocks, tied stones to the frame, and pushed it overboard. But the next morning, it was back, floating just where they found it, empty, untouched, and the kimono, still folded, was somehow dry. That was the last time anyone tried to move it. Tetsuya ordered the vessel locked up in the boathouse, behind steel and prayer scrolls. He didn't know if either would help, but he knew this: nothing about this case made sense. Nothing about this village felt right, and nothing in the files he'd inherited from the last officer mentioned how many boats had come back without men. He called the prefecture for support. They promised to send someone, but days passed. No one came. The locals stopped talking to him, stopped looking him in the eye, as if he had already crossed a line none of them dared to approach. And maybe he had. Because late one night, Tetsuya returned to the dock alone. Something pulled him there. Not duty, not curiosity, something else. The sea was still, black, empty, except for a faint ripple just past the moon's reflection. He stepped closer, squinted, and there she was, standing again. Not far, not close, her white kimono dripping without end, her hair like threads of night, her eyes locked to his, and her voice, soft, broken, aching, rose from the waves. "Will you bring me home?" He said nothing, turned, walked away. But as he passed the boathouse, he saw it, the door wide open, the boat gone, and on the floor, a single eel, still wet, writhing in place. No one believed him the next day, but the boy did. He handed Tetsuya a sketch, a woman dressed in white, hair over her face, and behind her, dozens of shadows in the water, all reaching up, all smiling, all waiting.
They called it a village, but it was more like a ghost wrapped in skin. 47 homes, 18 boats, and less than 70 people, most of them men. They lived quiet lives, tucked between the sea and the cliffs, lives ruled not by laws, but by tides, weather, and silence. Visitors rarely came. Those who did never stayed. And no one, absolutely no one, asked about the women. It wasn't that the village hated women, it was that they no longer had any. The few who remained were either too old to walk or too frightened to speak. The rest had left, or vanished, or drowned. The record said different things, but the villagers all knew the truth, though none dared speak it out loud, not even to each other. The youngest man in town was 25. The oldest was 92. None of them were married. Some had tried, years ago, bringing wives from other towns, even cities. The weddings were simple, the smiles forced, the blessings whispered through teeth clenched in fear. The wives never lasted long. One walked into the sea during a storm and was never found. Another locked herself in the temple and refused to eat or sleep until her husband sent her away. A third left in the middle of the night, barefoot and bleeding, whispering to herself in a voice that wasn't her own. After that, no one tried again. Marriage was a risk, love was a curse, and loneliness was safe. But safety had a price. The men aged without partners. Their homes stayed cold, their meals silent, their eyes heavy with years unshared. They grew used to it, or at least they convinced themselves they did, until one by one they began hearing things. A voice at the edge of the waves, a question whispered into dreams, a white shape drifting beyond the nets. Will you bring me home? Most said no. Some said nothing. But a few were too tired to resist, and those were the ones who never came back. The village had no funeral ceremonies anymore. No priests left who dared say prayers for the drowned. Instead, they painted names on small wooden slats and tied them to the backs of boats. Let the sea take them, someone once said. If it wants them so badly, let it have them. But the sea never gave them back whole. Not really. Bodies would return, faces frozen in the same open-mouthed scream, hands clawing at nothing, and always the same detail, mouths packed with living eels. No one could explain it. Not science, not spirit, not even the elders who had once seen something similar, long ago, before they learned to stop looking. The boy who had sketched a woman in white now walked with his head down, his lips stitched shut by his own fear. He hadn't spoken since the night he drew her. His mother tried to take him away, to a city, to a temple, to anyone who would help, but the road washed out with the first storm of the season. No one had fixed it. No one tried. And so the village remained, hemmed in by sea and stone, sealed by fog and silence. Tetsuya watched all of this from his small office overlooking the harbor. He had once thought it a peaceful place. Now it felt like a waiting room for death. He reread the reports, compared the missing persons files, searched for patterns, and slowly something began to emerge, not from the data, but from the gaps between it. The missing men had all lived alone. They had all fished alone. And they had all, in the last few weeks before vanishing, been heard talking to someone who wasn't there. One man had even written about it in a notebook found after his disappearance. A single line repeated again and again across the last page. She listens when no one else does. He closed the file, lit a cigarette, and stared out at the sea. Below, the fog rolled in thicker than before. He thought he saw something shift beneath it, a flicker of white, a curve of hair, a hand. But when he blinked, it was gone. Just the water, just the tide, just the quiet pull of something too old to name. And far off, carried faintly on the breeze, came a whisper not meant for the living. Will you bring me home?
His name was Jun, 32 years old, marine archaeologist. Skeptical, precise, and famously detached from superstition. He came to the village not for ghosts, but for sediment cores and sonar scans. The government had approved a research project, something about mapping old tectonic shifts under the shallow shelf off the coast. He had a grant, a team waiting in the city, and enough equipment to scan the entire seabed within a week. But what he didn't have, and what no one warned him about, was the weight of silence that greeted outsiders here. The first time he arrived, the cab driver refused to go further than the forest line, said the road ahead wasn't safe at night. When Jun asked why, the man only muttered something about widow fog and turned the car around before Jun could say thank you. So he walked the rest of the way. The village wasn't welcoming. Faces peeked from behind curtains, then vanished. No children playing, no women visible, only men with hollow eyes and mouths that never quite smiled. At the harbor, Jun found his lodging, a small wooden inn barely standing, run by a man who looked like he'd once been handsome before something inside him gave up. The room was clean, but everything smelled faintly of mildew and seawater. There was no Wi-Fi, no reception, no mirror. June asked about renting a boat. The innkeeper looked up slowly and said, "We don't lend boats to strangers anymore." "Why?" June asked. "Because strangers never come back." June laughed. The man didn't. That night, June reviewed his notes, preparing for the dive the next morning. His goal was simple: confirm the presence of submerged shrine structures rumored to exist along this coast. Local fishermen had spoken of odd sonar pings, unexplained obstructions beneath the waves. He wanted data, not stories. But just before bed, he noticed something strange. On the bedside table was a folded piece of paper, heavy with moisture. No one had entered the room. He was sure of it. He unfolded it slowly. A charcoal sketch, drawn by hand, delicate, haunting. A woman in a white kimono. Her hair covered most of her face, but her mouth was open, not in a smile, in a whisper. Beneath it, scribbled in the bottom corner, "Don't listen." He didn't sleep well. The air felt thick, as if the room was under pressure. At some point past midnight, he thought he heard water dripping from the ceiling, though nothing was wet. And once, just once, he thought he saw someone standing outside his window. But the second he turned to look, there was nothing, just fog. The next morning, he walked to the harbor alone. The boats were lined up, tethered like animals afraid to wander. None looked used. He found one with a faded engine, untied it, and pushed out. No one stopped him, but he noticed something. Every man on the dock turned away as he passed, not to avoid looking, but like they couldn't bear to watch. Out on the water, the fog swallowed him quickly. GPS failed within minutes. The sea was calm, but the stillness felt unnatural, like something was holding its breath. He activated his scanner, dropped a submersible, and waited for the data to return. Nothing abnormal, until the sonar glitched once, then again. Then the screen went black, and in the silence that followed, he heard her. Not through speakers, not in his head, but out loud across the water, clear as glass. "Will you bring me home?" He turned. No one there. Only the ripple of something sinking just beyond the edge of vision. He felt a pressure behind his eyes, like something was watching him from below, like something knew him, like something had been waiting. He restarted the engine and headed back. This time, the fog didn't resist. It parted quickly, too quickly, like it wanted him to leave. The village was exactly as he left it, except now everyone stared, not with suspicion, with mourning, as if they'd already counted him among the gone. That night he tried to find the innkeeper, but the man was missing. His shoes were still by the door, his dinner untouched, and on the wooden bench outside the entrance, folded neatly and still dripping, was a funeral kimono. Not old, not stained, fresh, white, as if just returned from the sea. And beside it, lying motionless in a pool of brine, was an eel, still breathing. June didn't sleep that night. The image of the wet funeral kimono burned into his thoughts like salt in an open wound. He sat on the edge of the bed until sunrise, waiting for something. He didn't know what. A sound, a shadow, a second voice whispering from the walls. But the room remained still. Only the distant hiss of waves against stone reminded him he wasn't dreaming. At dawn, he stepped outside and found the village already awake. Men moved slowly, deliberately,
like each motion cost them a year of their lives. No one looked him in the eye, not even the boy sweeping the shrine steps. And when June passed the innkeeper's bench again, the kimono was gone. So was the eel, as if neither had ever been there. He headed for the village office, determined to report what he'd seen, if only to force someone, anyone, to respond. But before he could speak, the old man at the front desk raised a hand to silence him. "Another one," the man said flatly, staring down at the paper in front of him. "Who?" June asked. "Kenta, from the West Dock. Went out last night. Boat came back this morning without him." The old man slid a photograph across the counter. A fishing boat, modest, blue paint peeling, drifting in the fog. At its bow, a white shape clearly visible, folded, clean, untouched by storm. June felt a chill crawl up his back. "The kimono," he whispered. The man nodded, always the same, neatly placed, as if saying, "Thank you." June leaned closer. "How many?" The man didn't answer, just pointed toward the filing cabinets behind him. "I stopped counting after 20, and those are only the ones we bothered to write down." That afternoon, June visited the small village clinic on a hunch. He wanted to see the body, if there was one. He expected resistance. Instead, the nurse on duty, an elderly woman with shaking hands, led him to the back room without a word. The body was wrapped in plastic, the outline still vaguely human. She unzipped it carefully. June recoiled. The face was twisted in a grotesque scream, jaw unhinged as if the man had tried to vomit the sea itself. His mouth bulged unnaturally. June leaned in. Inside were eels, dozens of them, writhing, still alive, thin, black, glistening with slime and salt. June stepped back, bile rising in his throat. "How is that possible?" he asked. The nurse said nothing, just zipped the bag shut again. "We don't bury them anymore, not after what happened last time." "What happened?" She hesitated. The grave opened from inside. June left in silence. That night the fog rolled in heavier than usual. Lanterns flickered across the village like they were struggling to hold their place in this world. The men stayed indoors, doors bolted, windows covered, as if the night had teeth. June sat alone, reviewing sonar logs, looking for any explanation, any glitch, any pattern. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the data spiked, a massive echo far beneath the seabed. No movement, no creature, just a shape, unnaturally symmetrical, a dome, a structure. He zoomed in. It was faint but deliberate, like a forgotten shrine buried beneath centuries of coral and silt. But before he could analyze further, the lights went out, the screen died, and in the dark, something dripped from the ceiling. Salt water, cold, slow. And then, from outside his window, a voice, soft, familiar. "Will you bring me home?" He didn't move, couldn't. The voice was too close, too quiet, as if it came from inside his chest. When the lights flickered back on, he was alone, but the floor was wet, and beside the door, impossibly, a single eel lay twitching. Its mouth opened, and from it spilled something white and slimy, threaded like silk, but wet and cold. A shred of fabric from a kimono. June didn't scream. He just sat there, breath shallow, heart pounding against a truth he didn't want to believe. Whatever was happening wasn't random. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a pattern. And someone, or something, was still performing it. June spent the next morning knocking on doors. Most didn't open.
Some opened only a crack before closing again in silence. He wasn't surprised. The village clung to its fear the way others clung to faith. But he kept knocking until he reached the last house, a squat wooden structure hidden behind overgrown plum trees at the far end of the cliffs. The door was already ajar. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The air smelled of seawater and old wood, and in the center of the room, seated in a bamboo chair carved by hand, was a man so thin he looked carved from driftwood himself. His skin hung in folds. His eyes were sunken but alert. He stared at June like he had been waiting for years. "You're the outsider," the man said, not as a question. "You heard her." June swallowed. "Yes." The man nodded. "She always comes for the lonely ones first." June sat down on the tatami mat across from him. "Who is she?" The old man looked toward the window, where fog pressed gently against the glass like breath. "She was never meant to die, not like that." He didn't speak for a long time after, just stared, remembering. And then, slowly, he began to tell the story. "It was 80 years ago, before the war. This village was different then, full of laughter, full of families. There was music, festivals, bonfires on the beach. But there was also the sea, and the sea took what it wanted." He leaned forward. "There was a typhoon, the worst in a generation. The waves swallowed 3 houses in one night. Fishermen refused to leave their homes. The children screamed in their sleep. The villagers believed the storm wasn't natural. They said the sea was angry, hungry, and hungry seas demand sacrifice." June stared. "You mean a bride?" the man said. "That's what the elders decided. An offering. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But this one was different." He closed his eyes. "She was beautiful, too beautiful, gentle, kind. Her name was Sumire, 17, promised to marry the son of the head fisherman. But the sea didn't care about love." He exhaled slowly. The breath sounded like waves retreating from shore. "They dressed her in a white kimono, sewn by her mother, painted her face, braided her hair, and then, at midnight, they led her to the rocks." "Alive?" June whispered. The old man didn't answer. He didn't need to. "They tied her to an anchor stone, whispered prayers, promised the sea peace in exchange for theirs, and then they pushed her over the edge." His voice broke. "She didn't scream. That's what haunted us most. She just disappeared, like the water had been waiting for her." The room fell silent. The wind scratched gently at the wooden walls. "What happened after?" June asked. "The storm passed. The sea calmed. The village was saved. Crops returned. Fish came back in droves. People rejoiced. But the price," his voice thinned, "the price never left." June leaned in. "You said it wasn't the first time. What happened to the others?" The old man smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was grief folded into memory. "They stayed gone. The sea took them, and that was the end of it. But not Sumire. She came back." "When?" "Not her body, her presence. First in dreams, then in voices, and then in the fog." He pointed to the coastline beyond the window. Men began seeing her, a woman in white, walking across the waves, her kimono dripping, her hands pale, her eyes searching. For what? The man replied. For someone to take her home. You see, she wasn't angry, not at first. She was lost, bound to the ritual, trapped between the death they gave her and the love she was denied. She remembered the world, but it forgot her. And the eels? June asked. The old man flinched. Symbols. In old sea rites, they were messengers, slithering between worlds, carrying prayers from the living to the drowned, but twisted now, warped, corrupted by repetition. Now they fill the mouths of the men who try to follow her, as if the sea's trying to silence them before they tell the truth. He turned to June, and for the first time his eyes were sharp. You saw her, didn't you? June didn't answer. He didn't need to. The man nodded slowly. Then she's chosen you. She doesn't pick at random. She finds the ones with grief in their bones, the ones who carry silence like a second skin. June's voice shook. What does she want from me? The old man whispered. She wants a wedding and a grave, but most of all, she wants to be remembered. Outside, the fog thickened. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, the sea whispered like a forgotten vow, and June realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think until now. This wasn't just a haunting. It was history repeating itself, and this time he might not be allowed to forget.
They didn't speak her name anymore, not in full, not even in whispers. The villagers only called her that woman, or the one from the sea, as if naming her would invite her closer. But legends, like tides, return in cycles, and June, now too deep to turn back, needed to know the truth. He returned to the old man the next evening, carrying a notebook and a digital recorder. "Tell me the rest," he said. "I want her real name." The old man didn't move at first. Then, with a breath so long it sounded like he was exhaling years, he began. After they drowned her, Sumire was never spoken of again, not by her family, not by the elders. They told the village to move on, to celebrate the sea's mercy. But her fiancé, he paused. He refused to forget. June leaned in. He went to the cliff every day, leaving food, sake, offerings. He carved her name into a wooden prayer board and nailed it to the rocks. People called him mad, said he was tempting fate. That's when the dreams began. First his, then others. They all dreamt of her, but changed. Her mouth moved, but her voice came from underwater. Her kimono clung like skin, and her eyes, they were no longer just sad. They were deep, like they saw through flesh and memory. The old man reached under the floorboards and retrieved something wrapped in rice paper. He unfolded it slowly. Inside was a scroll, aged, cracked, edges blackened by time. "This is the oldest record we have," he said. "Before the war, a monk passed through here. He stayed only 2 nights, but he left this behind." June read the faded ink aloud. "Unagi Nyōbō." The old man nodded solemnly. "The eel wife." "Why eel? Why not just ghost bride?" "Because they say she didn't return as she was. The sea changed her. When a soul is submerged in grief too long, it loses shape. It latches on to symbols, meaning. The eel is sacred to the sea. It slips between worlds, between mud and salt, life and death, desire and decay. And so she became one with them. Her hair moves like them. Her voice glides like them. Her touch, cold, soft, coiling. June's voice was hoarse. "Is she still human?" The old man answered without hesitation. "No, but she wears the memory of one. That's more dangerous. A monster only wants to feed, but a memory wants to be felt." He pointed at the name again. "Unagi Nyōbō is not a title. It's what she became. Not Sumire, not a woman, not a ghost, but a bridge, a bride of water, a wife to nothing, a hunger with form." June's mind reeled. So what does she want now? The old man whispered, "She wants to finish the ritual." "But the storm ended." "Yes," the man said, "but she never got her wedding. She never said goodbye. And when grief festers long enough, it stops looking for peace. It starts looking for company." June stood, heart pounding. "She's luring people to join her." "No," the man said. "She's choosing them." "Why me?" "Because you listened." June turned to leave, but the man called after him one last time. "Do not call her by name again. Not near water, not in fog. The sea remembers, and so does she." That night, June returned to his room, but he didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the fog gather like breath held in an ancient chest. The name echoed in his mind, Unagi Nyōbō. It didn't feel like a name. It felt like an invocation, a door, and he had just opened it. At exactly 3:12 a.m., his phone buzzed, though there was no signal. A voice message, no number, no ID, just a whisper, muffled, wet, familiar. "Will you bring me home?" Then silence. He looked outside, and in the mist, standing on the rocks where the tide met land, she waited, not moving, not threatening, just there, draped in white, hair long and dripping, eyes open, and the sea behind her breathing like a mouth.
The fog didn't clear for 3 days. It sat heavy on the village like a veil soaked in seawater, clinging to rooftops, curling through cracks in the wooden walls. The fishermen didn't leave their homes. The docks were silent. Even the crows avoided the cliffs. June used the time to dig. The old man had warned him to stop asking questions, but something inside him, curiosity or doom, kept pulling him forward. He spent the morning in the storage room of the abandoned harbor office, rifling through rusted cabinets and mildew-stained drawers filled with forgotten paperwork. Most of it was useless: fish stock ledgers, boat permits, maps with no names. But then, hidden behind a stack of rotting tide charts, he found a box labeled only with a year, 1996. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Some faded, some water-damaged, others curled at the edges like they didn't want to be touched. He sorted through them slowly, smiling men on boats, families posing in front of the shrine, children with wind-chapped cheeks holding up their catch like trophies. But one photo stopped him cold. It was a Polaroid, undated, slightly warped. A man stood at the bow of a small wooden boat, mid-laugh, arms outstretched as if celebrating a good haul. Behind him, near the edge of the frame, something blurred, something white. A figure, hair long, kimono trailing. Her face was turned just enough for one eye to catch the light, dark, glistening, watching the camera. June's hands shook. He checked the back. Scribbled in pencil, "Last trip, Hiroshi." He took the photo to the old man, who went pale the moment he saw it. "Hiroshi was my cousin," he said. "Went out during eel season, never came back. We found his boat 2 days later." "And this?" June pointed at the shape.
The old man refused to touch the photo. "No one noticed it back then. We didn't look too closely. Maybe we didn't want to." "But it's her," June said. "She was on the boat before he died." The old man said nothing, just reached for his cane and stood, slower than before, older somehow. "You need to leave before she chooses you." June pocketed the photo and left. That night, he scanned the image into his laptop and enhanced the details. The shape became clearer. The fabric of her kimono glistened as if still wet. Her hair floated around her like strands suspended in water, even though she was standing on solid wood. But it was her face that froze him. It wasn't monstrous. It wasn't rotted or demonic. It was beautiful, almost heartbreakingly so, and unbearably sad, like she had been waiting too long to be seen. Her lips were parted slightly, and June could almost hear the words forming. "Will you bring me home?" He slammed the laptop shut. His hands were cold. The air had gone thick again. And something moved in the hallway outside his room. Slow, barefoot, wet. He didn't call out. He knew better now. The floorboards creaked once, then silence. When he finally opened the door, no one was there, only a trail of faint moisture leading away toward the harbor. At the edge of the steps, a single eel lay curled, still alive, mouth slightly open as if gasping for the ocean. June picked up the photo again, stared at her face, her sadness, her presence, and for the first time he realized she wasn't haunting out of rage. She was calling, searching. She wanted to be remembered, yes, but more than that, she wanted not to be alone. And in that moment, something inside June cracked, not from fear, but from recognition. He too had carried silence for too long. He too had lost someone to the sea. The fog outside thickened like breath against the window pane, and somewhere beneath it, a voice drifted in, as gentle as the tide pulling sand from beneath your feet. "June?" Not just a whisper now, a name, his name. She knew it, and that meant she was closer. It happened just before dawn, in that thin sliver of time where night still clings to the world and light has not yet taken root. June had not slept. The air in his room felt thick with something unspeakable, as if the fog outside had seeped through the walls and wrapped itself around his lungs. He sat by the window, the photograph of Hiroshi still open on his lap, eyes fixed on the harbor barely visible through the mist. The village was silent. Not even the gulls cried. And then he heard it. Not a whisper this time, not a voice inside his head, a sound outside, real. A splash, followed by the soft patter of footsteps on wet stone. He stood slowly, opened the door, stepped barefoot into the cold. The mist curled around him like breath. Each step down the path felt heavier than the last, like the air itself resisted movement. He followed the sound toward the jetty, past the shrine, past the broken lamp where the wind always turned colder. And there, at the very end of the dock, she stood. Not a vision, not a memory, a presence. Her back was to him. The white of her funeral kimono glowed faintly against the gray fog, the hem soaked and trailing like a veil in mourning. Her hair, long, wet, impossibly black, cascaded down her spine in tangled waves. She was still, so perfectly still that she might have been carved from salt. June's breath caught. He knew he should run. Every instinct screamed. But something deeper held him there. Something older, something quiet and aching. She turned, slowly, gently, and for the first time he saw her face without blur, without water, without the veil of dream. It was young, ageless, beautiful in the way that sadness makes something sacred. Her eyes met his, and they were not empty. They were full of grief, full of memory, full of longing. Not hunger, not hatred, longing. Her lips parted, and then she spoke. "You heard me." Her voice was low, echoing, not just through the air, but through his chest, through bone, like it came from inside him. Jun nodded, unable to speak. "Most forget," she said. "They hear me, but they pretend they don't." She took a step forward. Water pooled around her bare feet, though the dock was dry. "But you remembered." "What are you?" Jun managed to whisper. Her eyes never left his. "What they made me, what they left behind." "Sumire," he breathed. She flinched, just slightly. A ripple passed through the fog. "That name belongs to a girl who drowned before she could say yes. And now? Now, I ask." She took another step. Her kimono dragged across the wood with a sound like soft weeping. "I ask because no one ever said yes. I saw the others, the dead, their mouths. They lied," she said, her voice still calm. "They promised to bring me home, but they were afraid. They turned back, so the sea kept them. Why the eels? They listen. They remember. They carried me when the others let go. They whisper my name when the world forgets." Her hand rose slowly, palm open toward him, not in threat, in invitation. "Will you bring me home?" Jun stood frozen. The dock creaked beneath them. The fog swirled around their ankles like lace. Her fingers waited, so close, so cold. He didn't take her hand, but he didn't step away either. "Where is home?" he asked. She tilted her head, and in that moment her beauty cracked just slightly, revealing something beneath. Not malice, not decay, but depth. Endless, sorrowful, oceanic depth. "Beneath," she whispered, "where they tied the stone, where the last breath left my lips and the silence began." She stepped back, just one step, and the water responded, rippling upward, gently, around her legs. "I will wait, but not forever." And then she was gone. Not vanished, not dissipated, simply gone. As if the mist had reabsorbed her, as if she had always been part of it. Jun stood alone on the dock, the silence pressing in from all sides. He looked down at his feet. A single eel lay across the boards, not writhing, not threatening, just watching. He picked it up with shaking hands. It was smooth, cool, alive, and inside its eyes for just a second, he thought he saw her reflection. That night, Jun didn't sleep. He opened his laptop, pulled up maps, old records, dive plans. He began to trace the location of ancient rocks off the southern cliff, the place where the rituals had happened, the place she called beneath, the place no one dared name. Because now he understood something terrible and true. She had not chosen him for his strength. She had chosen him for his grief. And grief, if you are not careful, can pull you under.
Jun stopped seeing his own reflection. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was just a flicker in the corner of a mirror, a delay in movement, a shadow of someone who shouldn't have been standing behind him. He told himself it was exhaustion, lack of sleep, a trick of condensation. But by the third day after their encounter, he stopped turning on the lights in the bathroom altogether. Because every time he looked in the mirror, it wasn't just his reflection anymore. Her face was there too, always slightly out of focus, always just behind him, wet, watching, waiting. The villagers noticed the change. They didn't speak to him, but they no longer just looked through him. Now they looked at him like they recognized something familiar in his eyes, like they'd seen that stare before, in other men who spoke too long with the sea. The old man at the edge of the village didn't answer the door anymore. The shrine had gone silent. Even the waves moved differently now, less like water, more like something breathing. June kept working. It was the only thing that tethered him to the version of himself that still believed in science. He mapped the rock ledges off the southern cliff, used old depth readings and survivor logs from fishermen long dead. Every route, every angle led to one location, an underwater ridge marked by collapsed coral and a sunken shrine built generations ago. And right beside it, a pit, a hollow black chasm, too symmetrical to be natural, as if something had been placed there or removed. He planned to dive, carefully, secretly. Equipment arrived from the city without labels. No one in the village helped, but no one stopped him either. It was as if they had already buried him in their minds. But every night before the planned descent, she returned. Not physically, but her face, in puddles, in raindrops on the window, in the condensation on the kettle lid. It was always wet, always watching, always sad. She never spoke again. Not directly, but her question echoed everywhere, in the dripping of faucets, the creak of wooden walls, the way the fog moved unnaturally when he stepped outside. One night, June dreamt he was underwater, not diving, not swimming, just sinking, slowly, peacefully. She floated beside him. Her hand brushed his cheek, and her eyes, dark and infinite, held his, and in the silence of the sea, she wept. But her tears didn't fall. They drifted upward like tiny eels, writhing into his mouth, his lungs, his memory. When he woke, he was gasping, the bed soaked, not in sweat, but salt water. The smell of it clung to his skin, to the sheets, to the floorboards. He didn't tell anyone. Who would believe him now? The face in the mirror wasn't his anymore, not fully. The hair, the outline, the mouth, those were his, but the eyes belonged to someone else. Someone who remembered drowning, someone who waited too long for someone to say yes. He covered the mirrors, taped over the windows, removed every reflective surface, but it didn't matter. She was still there, in the glisten of the kettle, in the dark of his pupils, in every drop of water that touched his skin. And always, always her face was the same, never dry, never blinking, as if even in death she could not escape the ocean's grip. The villagers stopped coming near him. One child, bold and naive, pointed at him from across the shrine path and whispered, "That's the man she chose." His mother slapped the child without looking June in the eye. That evening, June sat at the edge of the harbor, staring into the water. It no longer felt like an ocean. It felt like a doorway, a mouth, and he, already half swallowed. The photo of Hiroshi lay beside him, now warped and stained, but her face still clear, still watching. He whispered into the night, not even sure if he was speaking aloud or just thinking it too loud. "I see you." And the water answered, without sound, without splash, just a slow ripple that moved against the current and reached the shore. That night, June dreamt his own face, floating, mouth open, eyes black, and her hands resting gently on his shoulders. When he awoke, he no longer asked if it was real. He only wondered how much longer he could stay dry.
The village no longer acknowledged his presence. Doors didn't open, eyes didn't lift. Even the wind seemed to pass around him, as if the very air no longer recognized him as living. June walked through the mist like a shadow that had forgotten how to cast itself. He didn't eat, he didn't speak, he barely slept. And when he did, The dreams bled into waking, soft arms wrapping around him in bed, the sensation of damp hair brushing his skin, the endless whisper beneath his breath that wasn't his voice, but always asked the same thing: "Will you bring me home?" But it wasn't a dream anymore, not this time. The 11th night came with no warning, no storm, no broken mirror, no eel twitching at his door, only quiet. A stillness so deep it felt rehearsed. He found himself walking to the dock, barefoot, wearing the same damp clothes from the day before, or the day before that. It no longer mattered. Time had thinned. The fog opened as he approached, not parting, but folding back like a curtain drawn by unseen hands. And she was there, standing at the end, white kimono soaked but unstained, her long black hair moving gently even though the air was still. This time she turned before he spoke, and she smiled, not wickedly, not sadly, just knowingly, like someone watching a letter finally arrive after decades of drifting through the ocean. June stepped closer. He could hear the soft splash of the sea against the wood below them, but her feet made no sound. Her eyes found his, and he didn't look away, not this time. She raised one hand, not beckoning, not pleading, just open like an offering. Her voice came low, rich with the weight of time. "June." His breath caught. She had never said his name like that before. Not in dreams, not in mirrors, not in fog. It sounded human and full. "You've heard me," she said. "You've seen me." He nodded. "You've carried me," she added softer, "in your grief." His lips trembled. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't have to," she said. "Grief finds its own home." She took one slow step forward. "Now I ask, not in silence, not in shadows." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. The fog leaned in to hear it. "Will you bring me home?" He wanted to run. Every cell screamed to turn and leap into the mist and vanish into the lie of forgetfulness. But something in him, something quiet, worn, broken, stepped forward instead. "What happens if I say yes?" Her eyes did not change. "Then I am not alone." "And me?" he asked. "What becomes of me?" "You will remember," she whispered, "forever." "Will I die?" "Not all at once." Her hand still waited, unmoving. Between them the water stilled as if holding its breath. "Where is home?" he asked again. She stepped closer, so near now he could feel the chill of her presence. "Where I was left, where I waited, where no one ever came back." He hesitated, but then, slowly, he reached out. His fingers brushed hers, cold, wet, real. She didn't pull him forward. She didn't drag him down. She simply closed her fingers around his, and that was it. "Then let's go," he said. "Not yet," she whispered. "Tomorrow, at the rocks, when the moon is highest, you will know." And with that, she released his hand. The cold lingered. The print of her fingers pressed against his palm like a bruise he would never lose. She turned, walked to the edge of the dock, and stepped into the sea. Not sinking, not vanishing, just becoming one with the tide, like she had always been part of it. June stood alone, the answer given, the choice made. Not out of madness, not out of courage, but out of recognition. Something in her pain spoke to something long dead in him. And now, Both had a date with the sea.
June didn't remember walking back from the dock. He only knew he was suddenly standing in his room, soaking wet, clothes clinging to his skin like a second drowning. He didn't remember taking off his shoes, didn't remember unlocking the door. The floor beneath him creaked with each drip from his sleeves, echoing like footsteps that didn't belong to him. He dropped onto the futon, eyes open, heart steady, but breath shallow, as if every inhale cost something more than air. Outside, the fog throbbed gently against the window like a living thing. It didn't press, it pulsed. And inside him, something had shifted. Not snapped, not broken, just moved, like a weight sliding into place. The villagers knew. He saw it in their eyes the next morning, though no one said a word. No one had to. They watched him like one watches a tide come in faster than expected. Like they knew the moment he said yes, he no longer belonged to the land. The boy at the shrine crossed himself and wouldn't look at him. The fisherman with the twisted hand spat when June passed, not in anger, but in mourning. The priest nailed another talisman to the post near the harbor. None of it mattered. The choice had been made. The sea had heard it, and it had begun to collect its price. That afternoon, the first crack appeared. Not in wood, not in sky, but in memory. June walked past the shrine and realized he could no longer recall the sound of his sister's voice. Not fully. He remembered her smile, her laugh, the way her hair used to fall into her eyes, but not her voice. It had slipped away, washed out, erased. That night he found a photo of them together, and her face was blurred. Only his remained sharp, as if the sea had started claiming his past, piece by piece. The next morning, he woke with seawater in his mouth. Not spit, not dream, salt. Real, on his tongue, in his throat. He coughed for hours until something soft and slimy slipped from his lips, a tiny eel, no longer than his finger. It squirmed on the floor for a moment before going still. He buried it behind the inn, said nothing, ate nothing, slept in pieces. At dusk, she saw her again, not in the water, but in the window's reflection. She stood behind him, hand resting on his shoulder, face unreadable. When he turned, she was gone, but the shoulder where her hand had been remained cold, wet, like fingers had sunk into the skin. The old man visited that evening, uninvited. He sat in silence for a long time before saying, "She's not what you think she is." June didn't reply. "She's not cruel," the old man continued, "but she is bound to the sea, to memory, to repetition. And once you step into her world, she begins to untie you from this one." "I already said yes." "Then hold on," the man said, "to whatever you can. Name, face, breath. Because the price isn't death, June. It's forgetting who you were before you sank." That night, June wrote his name 50 times on the wall with charcoal. He recited it out loud until the syllables felt foreign. He played recordings of his sister's voice, trying to remember the shape of her laughter. But the tape glitched. Her voice distorted, her words looped, then vanished. When he tried to play it again, there was only static, then a whisper, faint, wet. Home. June threw the recorder across the room. It didn't break. It just hissed once, then fell silent. He stared at the wet footprint appearing slowly on the floor. One step, then another, though no one had walked through the door. Outside, the moon was rising, full, pale, cold. Tomorrow, the night she had promised, and already the tide was rising. The clinic was quiet when he arrived.
Not the quiet of night, but the quiet of surrender. The kind that settles over a place when the people inside have stopped asking questions. Jun pushed open the door with a hand that no longer trembled. He felt calm now. Not brave, just hollowed. The nurse on duty didn't speak. She only looked at him once, then turned away. He walked past her without asking for permission and made his way to the back room, the room where the bodies were kept. There were 4 metal tables lined side by side. Only one was empty. The rest held the men who had disappeared in the past month. Fishermen, quiet ones, men with no wives, no children, just boats, nets, and a silence they thought they understood. Jun pulled the sheet from the first body slowly. The man's face was frozen in mid-scream, jaw wide, neck strained as though the final breath had clawed its way out. His mouth was open, too wide, unnaturally so. And inside, just like the others, were eels. Dozens, alive, slick, slithering like memories that had never been digested. They didn't scatter at the light. They didn't fear him. One stared back, its head emerging from the corpse's throat like it was speaking on behalf of the dead. Jun moved to the next table. Same face, same mouth, same impossible garden of living things growing inside what used to be speech. The third body had collapsed partially, rib cage fractured outward as though something had tried to leave through the chest. There were no organs, just water, salt, silt, and hair. Black, long, tangled in the rib bones like seaweed. Jun stepped back, bile rising in his throat, but there were no tears, no fear, only a slow, dawning recognition. They had all said yes, or maybe they hadn't said anything at all. Maybe silence was enough. Maybe loneliness opened the same doors. He didn't realize the nurse had entered until she stood beside him. Her voice was soft. "They never rot," she said, "not properly. Even after a week, the salt preserves them, but the sea still takes what it wants." Jun stared at her. "How long has this been happening?" "Longer than anyone admits." "Why haven't they burned the bodies?" "We tried once," she said, "in 72. The fire didn't catch. The eels wouldn't die. They crawled out of the flames and disappeared into the soil. That night, 3 more men vanished. Since then, we just keep them cold." She turned her gaze toward the final body, still zipped. That one was different. Jun opened it carefully. The face was peaceful, not twisted, not screaming. The lips were closed, but something bulged beneath them. Not alive, not moving. He reached in with gloved hands. The tongue had been replaced, not by an eel, but by a perfectly folded piece of white silk, a strip of kimono tied in a knot like a wedding ribbon. He pulled it free. It was warm, wet, new. The nurse backed away. "That one," she whispered, "was hers." "You mean, not one she took, one she returned?" Jun placed the silk on the table. It glistened under the light. "Why return him?" "He lied," she said. "He promised her he'd come back, promised he'd bring her home, but he changed his mind halfway down." Jun looked up. "Then this is what happens when you break the vow." The nurse nodded. "The sea doesn't punish, it remembers." Jun left the clinic in silence. The fog had thickened again, but now it didn't feel like fog. It felt like her breath, soft, persistent, pressed against the back of his neck. He walked to the harbor, stood at the edge of the dock, looked down into the black. She wasn't there, but he didn't need to see her. He could feel her, inside the salt on his skin, inside the rhythm of his pulse, now echoing not with life, but with weight, with promise, with debt. That night he tried to record a message to himself, to the world, to anyone who might one day hear his voice and wonder why he disappeared. But the recorder wouldn't work. Not the old one, not the new one. Every time he pressed play, the same sound played back. A whisper, wet, gentle, closer than before. Don't forget. And in the mirror, half covered, nearly forgotten, her face waited. Not angry, just patient and never dry.
The moon hung above the sea like a pale wound in the sky. It did not shine, it watched. The tide was higher than usual, spilling over the rocks, licking at the foundation of the dock like a beast testing the strength of its cage. June stood at the edge, alone. He had said nothing to the villagers. No farewell, no confession. They had watched from behind their shutters as he prepared the boat, an old one, worn smooth by time, silent in the water like a funeral barge. No engine, no lights, only a single oar, a lantern, and a wrapped bundle of salt-dried offerings, sake, silk, and ash. He pushed off just after midnight. The fog opened for him without resistance, parting like curtains in a temple, revealing a path that had not been traveled in decades. The water beneath was darker than night, smoother than memory, and for a long time there was nothing. No stars, no sound, only the rhythm of the oar slicing the stillness. Then she came, not suddenly, not like a horror, but slowly, like breath returning to a drowned body. One moment the sea was empty. The next, she was there, standing on the surface as always, kimono rippling, hair floating as if suspended in unseen currents. Her eyes found his, and this time they didn't ask, they thanked. She stepped into the boat without disturbing the water, sat opposite him, folded her hands in her lap like a bride awaiting a ceremony long overdue. The boat did not shift, did not groan. It simply moved forward, though Jun no longer rowed. The sea carried them, gently, purposefully, toward the place he had mapped but never dared to visit, the place marked on no charts, the place where the sea once swallowed a girl and forgot how to spit her out. As they floated, June spoke, not loudly, not to her, just to the space between them. I lost my sister. She drowned before I could say goodbye. I always thought I could save people, but I couldn't even save her. The woman did not answer, but her eyes softened, as if she understood, as if grief were a language they both spoke without needing words. The mist thickened again, but it didn't blind him. It wrapped around them like a veil, a ritual, and when it parted, the sea changed. The water grew colder, darker, not black, but deep. Beneath them, June saw shapes, stone pillars, broken gates, a sunken shrine choked by coral and time, and at its center, an empty space, a hollow the size of a girl. The boat slowed, then stopped. She stood, and so did he. The wind whispered something he couldn't understand, a language older than vowels, older than gods. She looked at him one last time and spoke. Here,
Then she stepped into the sea. No splash, no ripple, just descent. Downward, peaceful, like going home. June knelt at the edge and poured the ashes into the water. The remnants of the offerings, the cloth, the charcoal names he had written and forgotten, the voice recordings that no longer played. The sea took them, all of them, and for a moment everything was still. Then something rose from the deep. Not her, not a hand, just light, faint, blue, a shimmer. The shrine lit from below as if the ocean itself had exhaled memory. And in that light, June saw her face one last time, calm, smiling, dry. He didn't cry, he only whispered, "I kept my promise." And the sea whispered back, not in voice, in warmth, in silence, in peace. Then the light faded, the shrine darkened. The water returned to black. The boat drifted back with the current, slow and silent. June sat alone now, no weight opposite him, no sound. But the water beneath was still warm, still kind, still remembering. And somewhere in the distance, the fog began to open again, not as a warning, but as a path home.
The boat touched the dock just before sunrise. No one was waiting. The sky was pale, smeared with the color of ash and salt, and the air carried no sound but the slow lapping of the tide. June stepped out barefoot, leaving the bundle of offerings behind in the boat. He did not look back. His legs ached, not from exertion, but from silence. The kind of silence that grows inside you after you've said yes to something that should never have asked. As he walked through the village, windows opened slightly, eyes watching not with curiosity, but resignation. No one spoke, no one waved. A dog barked once, and then fell silent, tail tucked, retreating into shadow. June returned to his room. Everything was as he had left it. The notebook still open, the mirrors still covered, the lantern now cold. But the air, it had changed, drier, lighter, as if something had finally exhaled after holding its breath for generations. He sat on the futon and stared at his hands. They looked older, paler, but whole. His fingers curled slightly, and he felt the imprint of her hand still there, like salt etched into skin. He slept. For the first time in what felt like years, he slept without dreaming. When he woke, the room was dim, the fog outside thinning, and on the small desk near the window, something new had appeared. A recorder. Old, familiar, covered in dust. He didn't remember bringing it in. He didn't remember owning this model at all. The label on its side was faded, but the date scrawled in red ink on the back was unmistakable. 1984. He pressed play. At first, static. Then, breathing. Not his, not hers, a man's. Shaky, tired. Then the voice came, cracked but clear. "If you're hearing this, I said yes too." June froze. The voice continued. "Her name was Sumire. I remember that now. She told me once, in a dream. I met her on a fog night, just like everyone else, and I couldn't say no. I didn't want to be alone anymore." A pause, then coughing. "But I didn't finish it. I changed my mind halfway. I turned back, and the sea, it doesn't forgive that." June's heart pounded.
I tried to burn the tape, the voice rasped. It wouldn't burn, just hissed, like her voice was still inside. And now I don't remember my name anymore. Only hers. Only hers. Only he. The audio cut into static again, then silence. June stared at the recorder. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the back panel. Inside, beneath the battery, was a strip of white fabric, kimono silk, folded, dry, but faintly warm. June stood slowly, walked to the window, and peeled back the corner of the taped mirror. His reflection looked back at him. No other face, no shadow, but his eyes, they weren't his, not entirely. Something lingered behind them, not possession, not haunting, just a shared grief, a quiet witness. That evening he sat alone by the harbor, watching the sun lower into the sea like a burnt offering. The villagers didn't come. They didn't need to. They had already seen this ending before. But June wasn't like the others. He hadn't lied. He hadn't run. And somehow, the sea had let him go. Yet it had also left something with him. A voice, a memory, a burden, and a recorder that no one else could remember ever owning. He played the tape again, and this time, when the whisper came, "Will you bring me home?" he did not flinch. He only whispered back, "I already did." And the sea, somewhere beyond the fog, was still.
It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic tearing of sky, no tidal wave, no scream from the deep. It began with the small things. June waking before dawn without reason, his breath always damp, his clothes never quite drying no matter how long they hung. He stopped feeling cold or warm, only a steady, even pressure in his chest, like he was always slightly underwater. The villagers no longer looked at him with fear or pity. Now they lowered their heads in quiet respect, not as if mourning, but as if acknowledging something inevitable. He wasn't one of them anymore, but he wasn't gone. He had become something in between, and it was the sea that had chosen that place for him. The first sign came when a fishing boat drifted back to the dock, empty. The man who took it had gone out alone just after sunset, ignoring the warnings. His name was Kenji, 43, lived near the temple, never married, carried his loneliness like a second coat. The others said nothing when his boat came back. They had seen this before. They expected the usual: screaming corpse, mouth full of eels, kimono folded at the bow. But this time was different. There was no body, no scream, no silk, only an offering tray placed gently at the center of the boat. On it, a cup of sake, still warm, and a note, written in charcoal. 6 words: "She is home. I am here." No one claimed to know what it meant, but June did, because that night when he returned to his room, his pillow was wet with seawater, and beneath it, resting like a secret, was a river stone wrapped in black hair. He didn't flinch. He only held it to his chest. The weight was familiar. The sea was speaking again, not to call him, but to remind him the role was his now, not as victim, not as witness, but as ferry, the one who answered, the one who listened, the one who brought her home. And when it needed to happen again, because it always did, it would be him who stood at the edge of the fog and asked the question, softly, kindly, the way she once had. "Will you come with me?" Days passed, nights passed. June no longer counted them. He stopped writing, stopped recording. The mirror, uncovered now, showed a face that barely blinked, His eyes were darker, wider, not haunted, just deep. Sometimes at night he walked to the water and saw her there, just her outline, standing where the moon touched the waves. She didn't speak, she didn't beckon, she only watched, as if waiting for the next soul who would wander too close, too alone, too empty. And June understood. Not everyone could leave grief behind. Some carried it too far, some drowned in it, some became it. And someone had to be there when the sea asked for the next offering. So June learned to listen, not with ears, but with the ache inside him that never left. He heard the sea speak through broken nets, tangled lines, the silence in a widow's kitchen. And when the time came, he was ready. He stood on the dock as the mist rolled in, eyes open, voice calm, and he asked, not with cruelty, not with deception, but with the gentleness of someone who had walked both shores, "Will you bring her home?" The men who said yes never screamed. The boats returned empty but peaceful. No eels, no twisted faces, only silence, only stillness, only salt. And always, afterward, June would walk down to the harbor, light a candle, place a folded piece of white cloth on the water, and whisper something no one else could hear. A name, a thank you, a promise. He had become the bridge, the mouth between memory and sea. Not lost, not saved, but just the one who rode between. The sea was quiet on the night of the second wedding. Not still, never still, but quiet in the way a held breath can feel heavier than a scream. The villagers didn't gather. They didn't light incense or dress in ceremonial robes. There was no announcement, no drums, no songs, but they knew. In the way animals know when a storm is coming, in the way old wood creaks before it breaks. They stayed inside, windows shut tight, eyes lowered. But every one of them placed a white candle on their doorstep, silent witnesses to something older than grief, older than ghosts, something sacred. June stood at the shoreline, dressed in white. Not a kimono, not a robe, just a plain, salt-washed shirt, stitched by the old woman who used to care for the shrine before her voice was taken by the fog. She had said nothing as she handed him the cloth, only placed it in his hands and bowed. The boat had been prepared days earlier, small, clean, simple. At its center, a woven mat of seagrass. No oars, no anchor. Because this journey didn't require steering, it only required surrender. The sea would do the rest. As the moon reached its highest point, full, clear, and unspeakably still, she appeared. Not from beneath the water, not from mist, but walking, as if the waves had hardened into glass just for her. Her hair floated behind her like silk. Her kimono shimmered with pale blue threads that caught moonlight like dew. And her eyes, no longer desperate, no longer sad, held only one question. Not "Will you bring me home?" That question had already been answered. Now it was this: "Will you stay?" Jun stepped into the boat without hesitation. She joined him. This time she sat beside him, not across, and the boat moved. No one watched them leave, but every window faced the sea. Every candle flickered once, then stilled, as if the entire village exhaled in unison. The boat drifted past the shrine's ruins, past the underwater ridge where stone pillars still wept ancient secrets. It stopped at the place she had died, but she didn't weep, and neither did he. Instead, she stood, took his hands, and whispered something so soft the water itself leaned closer to listen. "No more waiting." He nodded. "No more leaving." She pressed her forehead to his. The sea rose gently around them, not in violence,
not in hunger, but like a mother lifting her child. A circle of foam formed around the boat, glowing faintly, humming with energy that felt like memory made warm. She reached into the folds of her kimono and pulled out a single eel, small, still, coiled like a ring. She placed it in her palm. It did not move. It did not bite. It simply shimmered and dissolved into water. Bound in salt, freed in vow. Jun understood. This was not a wedding in the way mortals wed. There would be no feast, no dance, no names exchanged, only silence. And in that silence, acceptance. She took his hand and stepped over the edge of the boat, pulling him down with her, not drowning, not dragging, just descending. Together. Into the dark, into the deep, into the space where time dissolved and memory held its breath. But they did not disappear, not completely, because the boat returned at dawn, empty, dry, resting at the dock like it had never moved, and in its center, folded with impossible care, was a new kimono, not white, but pale blue, the color of forgiveness, and beside it, a stone carved with two names, not etched with tools, but formed by water, by pressure, by the slow shaping of promise into permanence. No one dared touch it, but they all understood. The sea had been given something it had never received, not a sacrifice, not a bribe, but a choice, and it had chosen peace. There is a place the sea does not forget. It lies beneath the coral and the sediment, deeper than sonar, beyond the reach of light. It is not a trench, not a cave. It is something softer, stranger, a wound the ocean never closed. The villagers called it nothing. They didn't speak of it. They mapped their nets to avoid it, dropped their offerings far from it, turned their backs when the tide pulled toward it. But it was always there, beneath the shrine, beneath the stones, beneath the exact spot where the girl once sank with the weight of a family's fear tied to her ankles. Even after the ceremony, even after Jun stepped into the water and let himself be claimed by memory, something remained. Not her, not exactly, but a part of her that could not rise, could not be named, could not be freed. It waited, not with longing, not with rage, but with stillness. It took the shape of a girl kneeling, head bowed, hair floating, kimono torn at the hem, trailing across the seabed like roots. Her eyes were closed, her hands folded. She did not move, she did not dissolve. She had not aged, she had not awakened. This was not the bride. This was the moment of her death made permanent. A memory fossilized in salt and sorrow. And as long as it remained, the sea could not fully exhale. Above, Jun drifted. He had not died, not really, not completely. He lived now in the current, in the hush of waves against the shore, in the fog that came not to consume, but to remember. His voice was sometimes heard by those who fished alone, not as words, as warning, as comfort, as the gentle echo of someone who once said yes and never tried to take it back. But even he could not reach that place, that version of her, the kneeling girl, the sacrificed girl, the forgotten girl. Because some pain does not rise, some names are never called again, and when a name is not spoken for too long, it becomes something else, something heavier, something the water holds close. In the stillness of the deepest hour,
Beneath the weight of generations, she knelt, and though her lips never moved, a single thought pulsed from her like a heartbeat through the sand. Not a question, not a curse, just a whisper. I remember. And because she remembered, she remained. The villagers didn't know, or maybe they did and chose silence. Perhaps that's why they still left offerings long after the sea had calmed. Perhaps that's why no one dared to celebrate, only to observe, to bow, to place white candles on the shore every new moon. Not for June, not even for Unagi Nyōbō, but for the girl who stayed, for the grief that never floated, for the silence still kneeling beneath the waves. Because the truth was this: no ritual ever ends completely, no promise ever leaves without shadow, and no spirit ever truly departs if part of her is still waiting to be heard. The rain returned without warning, not the soft drizzle of morning, not the mist that curled around windows like breath. This was old rain, thick, heavy, filled with memory. It slammed into rooftops with the weight of unspoken names. It soaked the candles on doorsteps until their flames sputtered and died. Thunder rolled in from the sea, deep and low, like the voice of something ancient clearing its throat. The villagers closed their doors, locked their windows, but they did not pray, not this time, because they knew it was not Jun's doing, not hers, not even the sea's will. It was a man, another man, one who had looked at the fog and thought he could bargain with it. The one they warned, the one who smirked at old stories and said he would try. His name was Satoru, 31, a diver, bold, curious, outsider. He had arrived weeks after Jun vanished, claiming he wanted to document the folklore. The village had given him nothing, but the sea had. On his first night, he saw her, just a glimpse, white on the edge of the water, a figure, a question. "Will you bring me home?" And he had said yes, smiling, recording, as if the sea was just another story to be captured, edited, and uploaded. But the sea does not care for documentaries, and promises are not content. He returned from that first night changed, quiet, pale, but still defiant, still convinced he was in control. He spoke of her in whispers, called her beautiful, called her misunderstood, called her his. He told the village he would finish what the others started. He set out alone the next fog night, took a camera, took an offering, but he didn't believe. And when she came to him, when she placed her hand on his and asked again, he said yes, but in his mind he planned to turn back, to escape, to tell the story without keeping the vow. That's when the sky cracked. That's when the tide turned black. That's when the rain returned. The villagers knew. They always knew. Because betrayal has a sound, and this rain carried it. A scream beneath every raindrop, a thrashing in every gust of wind. Not from him, from her. From the part of her still kneeling beneath the shrine, still chained to the memory of being abandoned, again, again, again. At dawn, the storm did not pass. It thickened. The sea overflowed the dock. Boats ripped from moorings. The shrine steps vanished under salt. And in the middle of it, Satoru's boat returned, empty, shattered, cracked down the center like a broken promise. There was no kimono, no silk, no offering, only a camera, battered, waterlogged, but still intact. They placed it in the shrine once the water receded. None dared watch it, none wanted to hear her scream.
but Jun did, or something that was once Jun. That night, he came back, not in body, not in shadow, but in fog. He stood at the edge of the shrine, visible only to the boy who still swept its steps, and whispered one word. Again. Then vanished. And for the first time in many years, the boy heard her cry, not from the sea, from below, from the stone, the place where the girl still knelt, still remembered, still waited. The sea had forgiven once, but forgiveness, like vows, is not infinite, and now it would wait no longer. It would rise. The sea receded, but it did not calm. It watched, it listened, it waited, and in its waiting, it remembered. The storm faded over 3 days, leaving the village waterlogged and brittle. No one spoke of Satoru. His name was not carved, not burned, not prayed over. The camera remained where it was found, untouched in the shrine, its screen cracked, the final image frozen, half a face, pale, beautiful, wet, not his, hers, but twisted, mouth open in betrayal, eyes endless. The villagers cleaned the streets, pulled nets from trees, hammered new charms into doorways with hands that no longer shook, but they all knew something had shifted again. Only the boy at the shrine asked the question. Where is he now? The man who kept his word? The old man who once told June the truth only shook his head. He was never meant to stay, but he stayed anyway. Is that why she let him go? No, the old man said softly. That's why she became quiet. For days, the fog did not return. The sea exhaled slowly, and June, what remained of him, was not seen again. But sometimes, when a boat drifted too far, when a man stood too long at the edge of the dock with salt behind his eyes, something would appear, a shape in the water, a hand on the shoulder, a whisper, it's time. And if they answered, the boat would return without them, but whole, silent, and always at the bow a stone, smooth, etched by salt, with no name, only the shape of a promise. The shrine remained, half sunk, its steps broken, but its doorway untouched. And deep beneath it, where the light could not reach, the girl still knelt. But now she was not alone. Behind her stood another figure, barefoot, calm, watching. And beside them, rows of names carved into the stone, not by hand, but by memory. The ones who stayed, the ones who brought her home, the ones who listened. The sea did not hunger anymore, but it did not sleep. And far above, in the village that had learned how to survive silence, the candles still burned on new moons, not for fear, not for guilt, but for reverence, because they knew now, some promises sink, but some echo forever. The boy at the shrine grew into a man, quiet, watchful. He never left the village, never took a wife, but on the eve of every full moon he walked to the water and whispered one name, not hers, his, just once, to remind the sea that someone still remembered. And the tide would rise gently in reply, not to take, but to listen, because in the end it was not about who was taken or who was returned. It was about who remained.